In an age when heroes walked the earth, a war erupted that would echo through millennia. The epic struggle between Greeks and Trojans transcended mere battle. It became the foundation of legend itself, passed down through countless generations in whispered tales and soaring poetry. Did Troy truly exist? On the windswept shores of modern Turkey, ancient ruins still stand as testament. Those once mighty walls, now weathered by 3,000 years of time's relentless march, once sheltered a drama that would capture humanity's imagination forever. Through the voices of ancient poets, we inherited tales of divine beings and mortal champions, of love's ecstasy and vengeance's fury. Among these voices, Homer stands supreme, his Iliad and Odyssey weaving unforgettable images of bronze-clad warriors and capricious gods who toyed with human destiny. Long before ink touched papyrus, these stories lived in the songs of wandering bards who mesmerized audiences around crackling fires with tales both magnificent and terrible. Imagine an age when immortals descended from Mount Olympus to walk among mortals, when honor outweighed life itself, when battlefield glory was the noblest pursuit, and when a single woman's abduction could send 1,000 ships sailing across the wind-dark sea. This was the world of the Trojan War. Every human emotion pulses through this epic, intoxicating love and corrosive hatred, soaring pride and devastating grief, consuming rage and unexpected compassion. For 10 brutal years, an era's greatest warriors clashed beneath Troy's towering walls. Cunning Odysseus with his brilliant stratagems, Achilles, whose fury matched his legendary battle prowess, noble Hector, his city's stalwart defender, and Helen, whose beauty was said to rival the goddesses themselves. These names resound across the ages, remembered long after countless kingdoms crumbled to dust. The war's impact never truly diminished. Its stories have been endlessly retold and reimagined, inspiring everything from ancient Greek tragedies to contemporary cinema. They pose eternal questions about destiny and choice, about honor's devastating cost, about the true nature of heroism. The Troy story marks nothing less than the birth of Western literature. Yet our tale begins not with clashing bronze or dying warriors' screams, but with celebration, a divine wedding feast that would sow the seeds of catastrophe. Origins and background. Journey back now to that fateful celebration when mortal King Peleus wed the sea nymph Thetis, and Troy's destiny began its tragic unraveling. Golden light blazed through King Peleus's palace on his wedding day. This mortal ruler had captured the heart of Thetis, a silver-footed sea nymph of breathtaking beauty. Not since creation's dawn had such a union between mortal and immortal occurred. The gods themselves abandoned their cloud-wreathed palaces to grace the celebration, bringing divine gifts and blessings for this unprecedented couple. Zeus, thunder-wielding king of gods, presided from the head table. Hera, heaven's queen, sat beside him in resplendent finery. Poseidon, ocean's master, presented treasures from the deep. Apollo's golden lyre filled the hall with music sweeter than any mortal had heard. Dionysus kept wine flowing endlessly, while Athena's keen gray eyes observed everything. Every Olympian attended, save one. Eris, goddess of discord and strife, received no invitation. Perhaps Peleus feared her presence would darken the joyous occasion. Perhaps it was mere oversight. Whatever the reason, Eris discovered her exclusion, and bitter resentment consumed her heart. If denied the celebration, she would ensure the revelers never forgot her. As the feast reached its crescendo, gods and mortals alike, lost in wine and merriment, a golden apple rolled across the banquet table. The fruit gleamed with impossible radiance, capturing every eye. Upon its lustrous skin, 3 words were inscribed for the fairest. The celebration froze as 3 goddesses rose, each certain the apple was meant for her. Hera, the proud divine queen; Athena, wise goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare; and Aphrodite, whose beauty was unmatched throughout creation. Each claimed the golden prize as rightfully hers, and none would concede. The dispute intensified rapidly. The 3 goddesses demanded Zeus judge between them, but the god king was too shrewd for such perilous judgment. Even Zeus, with all his power, dared not declare one goddess fairer than the others, especially with his own wife among the contenders. Instead, he appointed a mortal judge, a young prince tending flocks on Mount Ida's slopes. Far from divine politics and splendor, this shepherd prince was Paris, son of King Priam of Troy. Though raised by shepherds, Paris was born royal. Years earlier, his mother dreamed she would birth a flaming torch that would consume Troy. The alarmed king ordered the infant abandoned on the mountainside, but fate intervened. A compassionate shepherd discovered and raised the child as his own. Now this forgotten prince, handsome and innocent of the world beyond his mountain pastures, would render a judgment that would shake nations to their foundations. Hermes, the god's fleet-footed messenger, led the 3 rival goddesses to the mountainside where Paris tended sheep. The young man was dazzled by their radiant beauty, though the gods had granted him sight to behold their true forms without being consumed. Each goddess, desperate to win the golden apple, offered Paris a gift beyond mortal imagination. Hera spoke first, her voice commanding and regal. "Choose me as fairest," she declared, "and I will make you a king among kings. You shall rule not merely a city, but an empire spanning the known world. Power and universal respect will be yours." Athena stepped forward next, her gray eyes gleaming with intelligence. "Choose me," she offered, "and I will make you the wisest of all warriors. Victory will follow you in battle, and your name will be immortalized for brilliant strategies and unmatched combat skill." Finally came Aphrodite, her voice like honey. "What value has power or glory?" she asked softly. "If your bed remains cold at night, choose me, Paris, and I will give you the love of the world's most beautiful woman. Helen of Sparta will be yours, and every man who sees her will envy you." Paris, young and consumed by youthful passion, barely hesitated. What were kingdoms or battlefields against love's promise? He handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, naming her fairest of the 3. In that moment, on a quiet mountainside, far from human kingdoms, the first stone in war's avalanche broke loose. Hera and Athena departed in fury, their wounded pride festering into hatred for Paris and, by extension, his home city of Troy. Aphrodite, delighted with her victory, reminded Paris of her promise. Helen, the world's most beautiful woman, would be his guest by being married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Soon after the judgment, Paris's true identity was revealed. He returned to Troy and was welcomed by his father, King Priam, who had long mourned, abandoning his son. The Trojan court marveled at the handsome young prince who had appeared so suddenly among them. When Paris announced his intention to visit the Greek kingdoms, ostensibly on diplomatic mission, his father gladly provided ships and suitable escort. But Paris had only one destination, Sparta, where legendary Helen lived as queen. Meanwhile, Greece's kingdoms had grown prosperous and powerful. The age of heroes had reached its zenith, with city-states ruled by men of legendary stature. Mycenae, the gold-rich city, was ruled by Agamemnon, a king whose ambition matched only his ruthlessness. His brother Menelaus ruled Sparta, having won Helen's hand, daughter of Zeus himself, if rumors were believed. Helen's beauty had drawn suitors from every corner of Greece. Before her marriage to Menelaus, her father, Tyndareus, worried that choosing one husband would earn the enmity of all rejected suitors. Clever Odysseus, king of Ithaca, suggested a solution. All suitors should swear an oath to support Helen's chosen husband and defend her marriage against any who would violate it. The kings and princes of Greece swore this oath, binding themselves to Helen's defense, an oath soon to be invoked. In Sparta, King Menelaus received the Trojan prince with full courtesy, unaware of Paris's designs on his wife. For several days, the Trojan delegation enjoyed Spartan hospitality. Paris charmed the court with homeland tales and exchanged gifts with Menelaus, while his eyes repeatedly returned to Helen. Whether Helen fell genuinely in love with Paris, was enchanted by Aphrodite's divine magic, or was taken against her will, enchant sources disagree. What remains certain, when Menelaus was called to attend funeral rites for his grandfather in Crete, Paris seized his opportunity. As the Spartan king sailed away, Paris and Helen boarded a Trojan ship under darkness's cover, taking considerable treasure from Menelaus's palace. By the time Menelaus returned to find his wife and wealth gone, the Trojan ships were already crossing the wind-dark sea toward Asia Minor's distant shores. The king's rage shook his palace to its foundations. The abduction or elopement was not merely personal betrayal, but an insult to Greek honor itself. Helen had been claimed by a foreign prince, her marriage vows shattered, and hospitality's sacred bonds violated. Menelaus wasted no time. He dispatched messengers to his brother Agamemnon, Greece's most powerful king, and reminded all former suitors of their oath. The time had arrived to fulfill their promise to defend Helen's marriage and punish those who violated it. The kings of Greece would go to war, and Troy would be their target. Fate's gears were now in motion, turning inexorably toward conflict. A goddess's casual spite and a prince's reckless desire had set the stage for a war that would consume a generation of heroes and reduce a mighty city to ashes and memory. Helen and Paris's ship sliced through the Aegean, its prow casting aside waves as it sailed toward Troy. Helen stood on deck, sea spray dampening her cloak, her golden hair streaming in the wind. Behind her, the Greek coastline faded into the distance, perhaps forever. Did she sail with love for the handsome Trojan prince beside her, or with sorrow for all she'd left behind? Ancient sources give conflicting answers. Helen had never controlled her own fate. Born daughter of Zeus and Iliad, so legend insisted, her beauty transcended the mortal realm, a divine inheritance that had dictated every turn of her life. As a child, the hero Theseus had kidnapped her before her rescue. Now, as Sparta's queen, she crossed the sea once more, a treasured possession in contests between mortals and immortals alike. Paris looked ahead with victorious satisfaction. Aphrodite had delivered her promise. The world's most beautiful woman now accompanied him. The wealth taken from Menelaus's palace would honor his father, King Priam. Yet Helen herself surpassed any material treasure. In his youth and pride, Paris barely considered the repercussions. The gods had blessed him, what more could matter? After days crossing the sea, Asia Minor's coastline emerged ahead. Troy rose magnificently on its hill, massive fortifications gleaming in the setting sun. As Paris's vessel entered the harbor, news of the prince's arrival with his remarkable companion spread swiftly to the palace. King Priam and Queen Hecuba welcomed their son in Troy's great hall, surrounded by their numerous children and counselors. Paris presented Helen as his wife and unveiled the Spartan treasure he'd brought, though some courtiers whispered anxiously about claiming another king's spouse. Helen's beauty left many spellbound. People said her presence commanded instant silence, as though a deity had appeared among them. Yet not all rejoiced at her arrival. Cassandra, Paris's sister, blessed and cursed by Apollo, with prophetic vision shrieked when she beheld Helen. Fire. She wailed. I see flames devouring Troy's walls. Return her before catastrophe strikes. But Cassandra's destiny was bitter. Though her prophecies held only truth, none would ever believe her words. The court dismissed her cries as lunacy, as always. Hector, Paris's eldest brother and Troy's mightiest warrior, voiced more reasoned concern. Brother, he said to Paris privately, have you grasped the gravity of your actions? You've seized another man's wife, not just anyone, but a Greek king. Do you imagine Menelaus will accept this quietly? Do you believe his mighty brother Agamemnon will tolerate such an insult? Paris dismissed these worries. The Greeks constantly fight among themselves, he answered. Their kings argue as readily as they celebrate together. And should they come, what then? Has any force ever penetrated Troy's walls? Our city has endured for generations, defended by the gods themselves. In following days, Paris and Helen wed, according to Trojan tradition. Troy's citizens crowded the streets to glimpse the legendary beauty as she proceeded to the temple. Some celebrated the union as Troy's victory. Their prince had won a bride desired by all Greece. Others, perhaps wiser, perceived approaching storms. Meanwhile, in Sparta, Menelaus's fury crystallized into steely resolve. Messengers he dispatched to his brother Agamemnon returned with pledges of aid. As Greece's high king, Agamemnon began activating old alliances and reminding Helen's former suitors of their sacred vow. For Agamemnon, Helen's abduction provided what he'd long coveted: justification to unify Greece's quarrelsome kingdoms under his leadership and potentially expand his influence across the Aegean. Helen and Paris lived as married partners in Troy for nearly a year before the first Greek delegation arrived. Odysseus, Ithacus, cunning king, and Menelaus himself came to Troy, bearing words, not weapons. King Priam's court received them with proper diplomatic courtesy, despite palpable tension. Return my wife and the stolen wealth, Menelaus commanded, his voice strained with suppressed rage. Do this, and no blood need fall between our peoples. Odysseus, ever the skilled diplomat, continued King Priam. Surely you recognize this transcends a quarrel between two men. Sacred hospitality laws have been violated. Your son enjoyed welcome as Menelaus's guest, then betrayed that trust by taking the host's wife and possessions. All Greece observes how this breach will be answered. King Priam, divided between love for his recently reclaimed son and his sense of honor, turned to Paris. The young prince sat with Helen beside him, his hand clasping hers possessively. She came of her own will, Paris declared, and I will not surrender her. Some accounts place Helen at this meeting, though silent, her gaze lowered, her inner thoughts concealed. Other versions suggest she was kept away, whether from Paris's jealousy or her own reluctance to face her former husband. Regardless, the embassy failed utterly. Odysseus and Menelaus sailed back to their waiting ships with only Troy's refusal. As the Greek kings crossed the Aegean homeward, Troy began war preparations. Hector assumed command of reinforcing the city's already imposing defenses. Neighboring kingdoms in Asia Minor received calls for alliance. Food supplies were amassed, anticipating prolonged conflict. Paris, however, seemed less troubled by the threat. He spent his time with Helen in palace luxury, trusting in Troy's walls and divine protection. After all, hadn't Aphrodite herself blessed their union? Stories tell of nights when, from their tower chamber high in Troy, they watched watchmen's fires burning along the coast fires, soon to be joined by 1,000 Greek campfires, as an unprecedented army assembled on Trojan shores. Throughout Greece, the call to war spread from kingdom to kingdom. The oath binding Helen's former suitors was invoked, and ships began gathering at Aulis, where the united Greek force-homers, Achaeans, would launch their mighty fleet. Some kings came eagerly, recognizing opportunities for glory and plunder. Others arrived reluctantly, bound by oath yet skeptical of the cause. Thus the stage was arranged. Through a goddess's malice, a prince's desire, and a woman's fateful sea voyage, two civilizations stood at the precipice of conflict that would engulf them both. Troy, ancient and proud, secure behind legendary fortifications, and the Greek kingdoms, unified perhaps for the first time in their history, preparing to cross the wind-dark sea with vengeance burning in their hearts. Aulis harbor, filled with ships from throughout Greece. Gathering of the Greek forces, a forest of masts rose from the harbor at Aulis, their furled sails creating shadows across waters now thick with vessels. Along the shore, an unprecedented military encampment stretched as far as the eye could see. Kings and common soldiers alike had answered the call, united beneath a single banner: vengeance for the stolen queen. At the heart of this vast assembly stood Agamemnon of Mycenae, High King of Greece, brother to the wronged Menelaus, and architect of this historic expedition. Agamemnon's royal pavilion commanded the beachhead, his crimson standard snapping in the coastal winds. Within its walls, the High King gathered his fellow commanders around tables bearing maps of the Trojan coast. While his brother Menelaus burned with personal grievance, Agamemnon's thoughts ranged further. For years, he had envisioned Greek dominion extending across the Aegean, bringing the prosperous cities of Asia Minor under his rule. Paris's reckless act had delivered the perfect pretext. This expedition would sail in Helen's name, but Agamemnon's vision encompassed far more than one woman's return. Yet not every Greek lord had rushed eagerly to war. Several had attempted to escape their obligations, unwilling to abandon their kingdoms for what promised to be years of brutal campaigning on foreign shores. Odysseus, the shrewd king of rocky Ithaca, had staged an elaborate performance of madness when Agamemnon's heralds arrived at his palace. He yoked an ox alongside a horse and plowed his fields with this mismatched pair, sowing salt where grain should go. But Palamedes, among the cleverest of Agamemnon's advisors, exposed the deception brilliantly. He placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus directly in the plow's path. The madman instantly swerved to protect his child, revealing his perfect sanity. Caught in his own trap, Odysseus had no choice but to honor his oath. though his heart remained in Ithaca with his beloved wife Penelope and their young son. The most crucial recruit proved the most elusive. Achilles, son of King Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, the very couple whose wedding feast had sparked this entire catastrophe, was prophesied as essential to Greek victory. Stories painted him as a warrior without equal, blessed with near invulnerability and combat prowess that eclipsed all others of his generation. But his mother, Thetis, gifted with foresight, knew that glory at Troy meant death for her precious son. She had concealed him on the remote island of Cyrus, disguised as a maiden among King Lycomedes's daughters. Once committed to the cause, Odysseus devised an ingenious scheme to unmask Achilles. Posing as a traveling peddler, he arrived at Lycomedes's court bearing gifts for the royal daughters, exquisite fabrics, glittering jewelry, and other treasures designed to delight young women. Hidden among these feminine luxuries, however, lay a magnificent sword and gleaming shield. While the genuine princesses cooed over silks and gemstones, one maiden moved instinctively toward the weapons, warrior instincts overriding the disguise. Achilles stood revealed. He joined the expedition willingly, bringing his beloved companion Patroclus and his feared Myrmidon's lead warriors, whose loyalty to their prince was absolute. Daily, more ships arrived at Aulis, their numbers swelling beyond anything the Greek world had witnessed. Menestheus of Athens commanded 50 black-hulled vessels. Diomedes brought 80 ships from mighty Argos. Ajax the Great, second only to Achilles in raw power, sailed from Salamis with 12 ships. His namesake, Ajax the Swift, arrived from Locris with 40 more. Nestor of Pylos, eldest and wisest of the assembled kings, brought 90 ships and counsel that all respected. When the final count was made, nearly 1,200 vessels crowded the bay, carrying approximately 100,000 men, the largest military force ever assembled in the ancient world. Among this unprecedented host, certain warriors stood apart. Philoctetus bore the legendary bow of Heracles, weapon of the greatest hero of the previous age. Idamusled, his Cretan contingent, his helmet crowned with boar's tusks in the ancient fashion of his island kingdom. The healer Machaon and his brother Podalirius, both sons of the divine physician Asclepius, would tend the wounded, and Calchas the prophet observed everything with his seer's eyes, knowing his visions would guide the expedition through the trials ahead. But despite this awesome concentration of power, the fleet remained trapped in harbor. Week after frustrating week, not a breath of wind stirred the air. The bay's surface lay smooth as polished bronze, perfectly reflecting the motionless ships. As endless days accumulated, murmurs of discontent rippled through the camps. Perhaps the gods themselves opposed this war. Some argued for returning home before autumn storms made any departure impossible. Desperate Agamemnon summoned Calchas. The prophet's pronouncement struck like a thunderbolt. Artemis, virgin goddess of the hunt, holds back the winds in anger. You slew her sacred deer in her holy grove, King Agamemnon. The goddess demands blood for blood. She will accept nothing less than the life of Princess Iphigenia, your eldest daughter. The color drained from Agamemnon's face. Sacrifice his own child like an animal at the altar. Impossible, he raged. But as the windless days continued their merciless procession, and as other kings began openly discussing departure, the High King's resistance crumbled. The expedition, his grand vision of Greek supremacy, hung in the balance. At last, he dispatched a message to his wife, Clytemnestra, in distant Mycenae. The letter contained a beautiful lie. Iphigenia was to come to Aulis, not for sacrifice, but to wed the great Achilles. This cruel deception would plant seeds of vengeance that would one day destroy Agamemnon himself. But consumed by ambition and the pressure of keeping his alliance intact, he convinced himself this terrible choice served the greater good. Mother and daughter arrived in wedding finery, Iphigenia, radiant with excitement at the prospect of marrying Greece's greatest warrior. She leaped from the chariot and rushed into her father's embrace. Agamemnon held his daughter close, tears streaming down his face, knowing the horror that awaited her. The ancient sources disagree about what followed. Some accounts claim Iphigenia learned the truth and, demonstrating courage worthy of her royal lineage, willingly offered herself to ensure Greek victory. Other versions describe her being dragged screaming to the altar, while her father turned away in shame. A third tradition holds that at the final moment, Artemis herself intervened, substituting a deer for the princess and transporting Iphigenia to a distant land where she would serve as the goddess's priestess for the remainder of her days. Whatever the truth, the moment the ritual concluded, wind filled the air. The sails of 1,200 ships billowed and strained against their moorings. Calchas declared the goddess satisfied, and Agamemnon gave the command to embark. Dawn broke over the greatest armada ever launched. Ship after ship glided between the headlands, painted prows cleaving through waves, decks crowded with warriors staring toward the eastern horizon. Behind them remained Clytemnestra, her mother's grief transforming into implacable hatred for the husband who had murdered their daughter. Hatred that would eventually claim Agamemnon's life, but that reckoning lay years in the future. Now the Greek fleet sailed eastward on favorable winds at last. The oarsmen found their rhythm, and the vast flotilla moved in coordinated formation across the Aegean. Each evening they made landfall on some island to replenish water supplies and rest. Each morning they resumed their inexorable advance toward Troy. During the voyage, the army's bards sang of glories yet to come. Young warriors dreamed of winning eternal fame beneath Troy's legendary walls. The kings refined their strategies and negotiated alliances. None suspected that this journey, which they anticipated would end in swift triumph, marked the beginning of a decade-long ordeal that would consume countless heroes and become the defining legend of their age. On Troy's towering walls, sentries maintained constant vigil, scanning the eastern horizon for the first glimpse of enemy sails. Within the city, Hector relentlessly drilled the Trojan forces and their allies, preparing for the coming storm. Paris lingered in the palace with Helen, perhaps finally grasping the magnitude of what he had set in motion. And Helen herself, what thoughts occupied her mind as she awaited her former countryman and abandoned husband? The ancient epics remain silent on this question, leaving us to wonder whether she felt triumph, regret, or emotions too complex for simple description. The winds that had been held back for so long now surged forth, billowing the sails of 1,200 ships as the Greek fleet swept ever closer to its fateful destination. High above, on Mount Olympus, the immortal gods leaned forward from their thrones, some championing the Greek cause, others favoring Troy, all eager to witness the legendary clash of heroes that would soon thunder across the wind-swept plains of Ilium. The Odyssey that had begun with a simple golden apple at a divine wedding feast was about to plunge into its bloodiest chapter. Journey to Troy, the colossal Greek armada, carved through the Aegean's azure waters like a blade through silk. 1,200 vessels formed a floating metropolis of timber and canvas that stretched beyond the horizon. White foam erupted beneath countless hulls as 10,000 oarsmen pulled in perfect synchrony to the hypnotic beat of war drums. At the prow of the flagship, High King Agamemnon stood like a bronze statue, his crimson war cloak billowing behind him, his steely gaze locked on the eastern horizon, where legendary Troy awaited its reckoning. The voyage proved anything but straightforward. The Greek kings, many commanding sailors who had never ventured beyond sight of their native shores, charted a meandering course from island to island across the wind-dark sea. Each evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson, they beached their vessels on protected shores. The warriors made camp, hunted wild game in unfamiliar forests, and refilled their waterskins from mountain springs. Around crackling fires, the kings debated battle strategies late into the night, while common soldiers shared tales of the homes they'd left behind or dreamed aloud of the glory and plunder that surely awaited them beneath Troy's fabled walls. But not every island welcomed these foreign warriors with open arms. Some communities, terrified of Trojan vengeance should the Greek expedition fail, barred their gates and refused provisions. Others, bound to Troy by ancient ties of trade or blood, took up arms in active resistance. Thus, the war's first blood was spilled not beneath Troy's legendary ramparts, but on these scattered islands, as the Greeks seized by force what diplomacy could not secure. Young Achilles proved his fearsome reputation during these early skirmishes. On the island of Tenedos, when local forces launched a surprise assault on Greeks seeking fresh water, the golden-haired warrior led a devastating counterattack that shattered the defenders and captured their chief settlement. It was here that he claimed as his prize a noblewoman named Briseisa, seemingly minor acquisition that would later spark a catastrophic quarrel and alter the war's entire course. The fleet made an ill-fated stop at sacred Lemnos, where Philoctetes, legendary bearer of Heracles' divine bow, suffered a horrific misfortune. A venomous serpent, guardian of an ancient shrine, sank its fangs deep into his foot. The wound turned gangrenous, producing a stench so unbearable that his comrades could not endure his presence. On Odysseus's cold counsel, Agamemnon ordered the suffering archer abandoned on desolate Lemnos to survive or perish alone. This cruel pragmatism would later haunt the Greeks, forcing them to beg aid from the very man they had so callously discarded. As the armada drew near Trojan waters, Menelaus grew increasingly agitated. A full decade had elapsed since he'd last gazed upon Helen's face, and long years during which his love had festered into something far darker, a consuming hunger for vengeance that devoured his every waking thought. One starlit evening, sharing wine with his brother, he voiced the questions that tormented him. Will she even recognize me? Will she still possess that divine beauty the poets sang of? Or has time's cruel hand dimmed what the gods themselves once blessed? Agamemnon offered no comfort, no answers. His own obsessions centered not on Helen, but on Troy's legendary wealth and the immortal glory that would crown whoever finally conquered the unconquerable city. And perhaps, in rare, unguarded moments, his thoughts drifted back to Aulis and the daughter whose innocent blood he had spilled on Artemis's. Alter a haunting memory he violently thrust aside whenever it surfaced from the depths. Before the fleet could make landfall at Troy itself, a critical strategic question demanded resolution. Where precisely could they safely land such an enormous force? Troy's immediate coastline offered precious few beaches capable of accommodating 1,200 ships and 100,000 men. Moreover, Trojan sentries would certainly be watching those obvious approaches with hawk-like vigilance. Nestor, eldest and most sagacious of all the assembled kings, urged caution. We must not announce our arrival with the full thunder of our armada. Let us dispatch a smaller vanguard to secure a beachhead and assess Troy's coastal defenses before committing our main strength. Odysseus supported this prudent strategy, but added his own characteristic twist. Before Greek and Trojan blood stains the earth, we owe it to our men to attempt diplomacy. Perhaps when Priam beholds the magnitude of our force, wisdom will prevail over pride. He may yet return Helen and offer fair reparations, sparing us all the horrors of protracted war. And so the decision was made. A small advance squadron would probe the Trojan coast, while the main armada held position among the scattered offshore islands, concealed from enemy scouts. Once a beachhead was secured, Odysseus, renowned throughout Greece for his silver tongue, would lead a peace embassy to Priam's palace. At dawn's first light, the advanced ships, commanded by brave Protesilaus of Phalos, approached the Trojan shore. Hidden among the coastal rocks, Trojan archers watched the Greek vessels draw ominously near. Their bronze-tipped arrows already knocked, as the lead ship's keel scraped sand and its gangplank crashed down. A deadly rain of arrows greeted the invaders. Protesilaus, burning with ambition to claim eternal glory as first Greek to touch Trojan soil, leaped from his vessel with shield raised high. A single arrow found the narrow gap between shield rim and bronze breastplate, punching through his lung. He managed 3 staggering steps onto Trojan sand before collapsing. In that brief moment, he fulfilled an ancient prophecy. The first Greek to touch Trojan soil would be the first to die. Yet despite this ominous beginning, the advance force surged forward with grim determination, driving back the Trojan defenders and carving out a beachhead large enough for the main armada's arrival. Swift messengers raced to Agamemnon with news of success, and soon the full Greek fleet emerged on the horizon, an awe-inspiring sight that sent even the boldest Trojan scouts fleeing toward their city's protective walls. As countless thousands of Greek warriors established their sprawling encampment on the Trojan plain, Odysseus prepared for his diplomatic mission, the expedition's last hope for avoiding catastrophic bloodshed. With Menelaus at his side and a small honor guard bearing olive branches as symbols of peaceful intent, Odysseus approached Troy's towering gates. The Trojans, impressed by this gesture and curious about these legendary kings who had sailed half the world to their shores, opened their massive bronze gates and escorted the Greek embassy through the city's bustling streets to Priam's magnificent palace. In Troy's great hall, before the assembled royal court, Odysseus deployed all the legendary eloquence that had won him fame throughout the Greek world. King Priam, noble princes of Troy, we stand before you, not thirsting for war, though, as your sentries have reported, we are more than prepared for it. We come seeking justice for a grievous wrong committed against the sacred laws of hospitality. Your son Paris has stolen what belongs to another, the wife of King Menelaus, and Sparta's royal treasury. Return Helen, and these stolen treasures offer fair compensation for this unprecedented breach of Xenia, and we shall depart in peace, leaving Troy unharmed and her honor intact. Then Menelaus stepped forward, his eyes desperately scanning the assembled faces for Helen, finding only curious Trojan nobility. When he spoke, his voice cracked with barely controlled emotion. "I speak now, not as a king, but as a husband. Return my wife to me. Whatever transpired between her and Paris, whether seduction or abduction, I am willing to forgive if she returns of her own will. All of Troy need not suffer for one man's actions." King Priam rose slowly from his throne, every year of his advanced age evident in his movements, yet his dignity undiminished. "You speak noble words of justice and peace, King Odysseus. Yet you bring an army to our shores that blackens the coast from horizon to horizon. Your war camp sprawls across our plain. Are these truly the actions of men seeking peaceful resolution?" Before Odysseus could formulate a response, Paris strode into the hall with Helen at his side, her exquisite features concealed behind a delicate veil, yet commanding every eye in the chamber. Paris spoke with the blithe confidence of privileged youth, seemingly oblivious to the catastrophe his actions had unleashed. "Helen is my wife now, by her own choice, and by divine Aphrodite's sacred blessing. What manner of husband would I be to surrender the woman I love to appease foreign threats? What manner of Trojan would abandon what is precious to him because Greece rattles its spears?" Menelaus lurched forward, his hand instinctively flying to his sword hilt, but Odysseus's iron grip on his arm restrained him. This was neither the time nor place for violence, not yet. The Greek embassy departed Priam's palace empty-handed, their diplomatic mission a complete failure, but not before Antenor, one of Priam's most senior advisors, pulled Odysseus aside in a shadowed corridor. His weathered face was grave. "Not all within these walls support this madness. Many of us urged returning the Spartan queen before your ships even darkened our horizon. But Paris has bewitched the king's judgment, and Priam's love for his son blinds him to the apocalypse gathering at our gates." With diplomacy's failure, both civilizations prepared for apocalyptic war. The Greeks expanded their beachhead into a massive, fortified encampment stretching along the shore. Their 1,200 ships drawn up on the beach behind formidable palisade walls, studded with watchtowers. Meanwhile, Troy's messengers galloped eastward across Asia Minor, calling upon every ally and vassal kingdom to send warriors to defend the greatest city of the East against the Greek invaders. From Troy's towering walls, Helen stood alone, watching the Greek encampment take shape on the distant shore. Did she search those distant figures for a glimpse of the husband she'd abandoned? Did regret pierce her heart for the choices or cruel lack of choices that had dragged to mighty civilizations toward mutual destruction? The ancient poets remained silent on her innermost thoughts, preserving only the haunting image of a solitary woman gazing from the battlements as vast armies gathered to slaughter one another in her name. The stage was now set for a conflict that would rage far longer than either side dared imagine. The Greeks had reached Troy at last, their overwhelming force assembled on foreign soil, ready to write their names in immortal glory. The Trojans stood defiant behind their legendary walls, confident in their divine protectors and impregnable defenses. Soon the blood-soaked plain between city and sea would echo with the terrible music of clashing bronze. The war cries of heroes ascending to Olympus itself, and the dying screams of men who sought eternal fame in the merciless face of death. Early years of the war, as dawn painted the Trojan plain in rose and gold, bronze spearheads gleamed in the first light. The Greek army assembled in battle formation, while across the field, Troy's gates swung wide to release its defenders. The opening clash of a decade-long struggle was moments away. For 9 grinding years, this deadly dance would repeat an unending rhythm of charge and retreat, triumph and tragedy, heroism and loss. Despite their vast numbers, the Greeks could not breach Troy's god-built walls. Despite fierce resistance, the Trojans could not drive the invaders into the sea. The war had reached a brutal stalemate. Understanding that Troy's walls might never fall to direct assault, Achilles expanded the conflict beyond the plain itself. Leading his elite Myrmidon's warriors, bound to him by unshakable loyalty, he struck at Troy's allies and supply networks. Homer records 12 coastal cities and 11 inland settlements falling to his relentless campaigns, each conquest adding to his fearsome reputation and filling Greek ships with plunder and captives. During the sack of Lyrnessus, Achilles claimed a noblewoman named Briseis. Though she entered his tent as spoils of war, something deeper developed between them, perhaps not love, but a profound mutual respect that elevated her beyond mere property in his eyes. While Achilles waged his peripheral war, Odysseus and Diomedes employed guile where force might fail. On one moonless night, they captured the Trojan spy, Dolon, extracting crucial intelligence about Troy's defenses and allied positions before silencing him permanently. The Trojans struck back with equal determination. Hector, Paris's elder brother, and Troy's mightiest champion led devastating counterattacks against the Greek encampment. His distinctive horsehair-plumed helmet became a beacon of hope for Trojan soldiers and an omen of death for Greek warriors. Unlike Paris, who preferred palace comforts to battlefield hardships, Hector embodied Trojan nobility perfectly, devoted husband to Andromache, tender father to young Astyanax, and Troy's tireless shield against destruction. The Olympian gods chose sides in this mortal conflict with divine passion. Apollo, the archer, Aphrodite, who had ignited the war through her promise to Paris, and Ares, who reveled in slaughter, all championed Troy. Divine interference took many forms. Sometimes a god might deflect a fatal arrow or strengthen a champion's sword arm at the decisive moment. Other times, the immortals walked the battlefield in mortal disguise, personally turning the tide of combat. When Aphrodite witnessed Paris losing his duel with Menelaus, she wrapped him in supernatural mist and spirited him to safety, a rescue that brought him no honor among his own people. As years accumulated, Greek camp life developed its own rhythms. The kings continued gathering in Agamemnon's tent for strategic councils, though frustration increasingly turned these meetings into shouting matches. Common soldiers constructed permanent dwellings, accepting the bitter truth that this would be no swift campaign. They fished the nearby waters, hunted the surrounding hills, and held athletic competitions to maintain their warrior edge during lulls in combat. Within Troy's walls, conditions slowly deteriorated under the endless siege. Though massive grain reserves prevented starvation, fresh provisions became rare luxuries. The constant vigilance exhausted civilians and soldiers alike. Children who had been nursing infants when the Greeks arrived now trained with wooden swords, preparing to defend the walls if the war stretched even longer. Helen's position grew increasingly complex as the siege dragged on. Some Trojans cursed her as they passed, blaming her for their suffering. Others, including aged King Priam, treated her with compassion, viewing her as fate's victim rather than the architect of their misery. She spent countless hours on the battlements, watching distant combat, occasionally summoned to identify Greek heroes for Trojan observers who had never seen these legendary warriors in peacetime. In the war's 8th year, hope arrived with King Rhesus of Thrace, bringing fresh troops and magnificent white horses to Troy's aid. Ancient prophecy declared that if these divine steeds drank from the river Xanthus and grazed on Trojan grass, the city would stand forever unconquered. When Greek spies learned of this prophecy, Odysseus and Diomedes executed a daring night raid. Under darkness's cover, they infiltrated the Thracian camp, slaughtered the sleeping Rhesus and his guards, then drove off the prophetic horses before they could fulfill the conditions that would have rendered Troy invincible. This pattern raid and counter raid, battle and uneasy truce might have continued indefinitely. But a catastrophic quarrel erupted in the Greek camp, a clash between kings that would alter the war's trajectory and doom its greatest heroes. During a raid on a Trojan-allied town, the Greeks seized 2 noble women, Chryses, daughter of Chryses, Apollo's priest, and Brises, from conquered Lernus. Agamemnon claimed Chryses, but soon plague ravaged the Greek camp. The seer Calchas revealed the terrible truth. Apollo himself was punishing them for enslaving his priest's daughter. Reluctantly, Agamemnon returned Chryses, ending the plague, but his wounded pride demanded compensation. "If I must surrender my prize," he announced before the assembled Greek commanders, "I will claim another in her place." His gaze fixed on Achilles, whose fame and independence had long irritated him. "I will take Brises, your captive, to replace what I have lost." Achilles' hand flew to his sword hilt. "You coward," he snarled, voice trembling with rage. "You command from safety, while better men bleed for your ambitions. And now you would steal what I earned with my own blood." Only Athena's intervention, visible to Achilles, alone prevented him from cutting down the high king where he stood. Instead, Greece's greatest warrior made a fateful choice. "Take her," he said finally, voice cold as winter wind. "But understand this, my Myrmidons and I will fight no more in your war. Let us see how you fare against Hector without Achilles at your side." True to his oath, Achilles withdrew to his ships with his loyal warriors. For days he brooded beside the shore, watching battle turn against the Greeks without his strength to tip the balance. Sensing Greek disarray, the Trojans pressed their advantage aggressively. Hector led increasingly bold attacks, driving the invaders back toward their beached fleet. Without Achilles, the Greeks found themselves battling not for victory, but for survival. The war had entered a darker, more desperate phase that would push both sides to the brink of annihilation. As flames began consuming the first Greek ships, pushed burning toward the fleet by advancing Trojans, the consequences of royal pride became devastatingly clear. Honor and reputation, the twin pillars of heroic society, had turned heroes against each other as surely as they had launched the war itself. Now, with their greatest champion sulking in his tent, the Greeks needed desperate measures to reverse their crumbling fortunes. The stage was set for the Trojan War's central tragedy, a cascade of events, beginning with well-meaning friendship and ending with the mightiest warriors lying dead. Achilles' wrath, ignited by Agamemnon's insult, would soon engulf the battlefield in flames, more devastating than any the Trojans could bring to the Greek ships. Smoke darkened the sky as more vessels caught fire. Trojan warriors surged forward, emboldened by Hector's leadership and Achilles' conspicuous absence. The Greeks fought with desperate courage, but were being driven inexorably toward the sea that had carried them to these hostile shores. In his black-hulled ship at the camp's edge, Achilles observed the unfolding disaster with stony indifference. His armor hung untouched. His legendary spear which few mortals could even lift leaned, unused against the wall. The great hero's fury burned ice-cold within him, directed not at Troy but at Agamemnon, who had publicly dishonored him by seizing Briseis. "The Greeks are being slaughtered," said Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion since boyhood. "Our comrades are dying while you brood over wounded pride." Achilles' gaze remained fixed on distant combat. Wounded pride, is that what you call it when a man steals what is yours by right of conquest? When he humiliates you before the entire army? No, my friend, this transcends any woman. This is about honor, without which a warrior is nothing. As catastrophe loomed, Agamemnon finally acknowledged his error. He dispatched an embassy to Achilles' tent, silver-tongued Odysseus, stalwart Ajax, and old Phoenix, who had helped raise Achilles. They brought extravagant compensation, Briseis, returned untouched, 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, 20 bronze cauldrons, 12 prize horses, 7 women skilled in fine crafts, 20 Trojan captives when the city fell, marriage to one of Agamemnon's daughters, and 7 prosperous cities as dowry. Odysseus presented these offerings with legendary eloquence, appealing to Achilles' compassion for suffering comrades. Ajax bluntly reminded him of the bonds uniting Greek leaders. Old Phoenix told cautionary tales about the dangers of inflexible anger, but Achilles remained unmoved. "I will not fight for Agamemnon," he declared flatly. "The man possesses no honor, and I want nothing from him. Not his gold, not his women, not his friendship. Let him reap the bitter harvest he has sown." The embassy returned empty-handed, leaving Greek commanders to prepare for seemingly inevitable defeat. Yet Achilles was not entirely heartless. As Hector's forces threatened the camp's heart, he granted his beloved friend Patroclus permission to wear his distinctive armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle. "Wear my armor," Achilles instructed. "The Trojans will believe I have returned and may lose heart. But heed me carefully. Drive them from our ships, then withdraw immediately. Do not pursue them to Troy's walls. The gods favor Hector within sight of his city." Patroclus agreed, though his pulse already raced with anticipation of glory. He donned Achilles' magnificent war gear, the gleaming breastplate, the silver-clasped greaves, the ornate shield, and most distinctive of all, the horsehair-crested helmet visible across any battlefield. The effect proved exactly as Achilles predicted. Believing the dreaded Achilles had returned, many Trojans broke formation and fled. Patroclus led the Myrmidons in a ferocious counterattack, driving the Trojans from the burning ships. But in combat's intoxication, flushed with success, and the unfamiliar sensation of being feared as Achilles was feared, Patroclus forgot his promise. Rather than withdrawing once the ships were safe, he pressed forward, pursuing retreating Trojans across the plain toward their city. 3 times Patroclus assaulted Troy's walls, and 3 times Apollo himself repulsed him. "Return, Patroclus," the god warned. "This is not your destiny." But caught in battle madness, Patroclus ignored the divine warning. As he fought beneath the walls, Apollo struck him from behind, stunning him and knocking his helmet loose. In that vulnerable instant, a Trojan warrior named Euphorbus drove a spear into his unprotected back. Wounded and disoriented, Patroclus stumbled backward directly into Hector's path. Troy's greatest champion struck without hesitation. His spear plunged deep into Patroclus's exposed belly. As the Greek warrior crumpled, Hector loomed over him in grim triumph. "Did you imagine you were Achilles?" he demanded. "Did you think you could sack our city wearing his armor? Now you fall, and he cannot save you." With his final breath, Patroclus delivered his own prophecy. "Savor your victory while you can, Hector. Death already stands behind you, waiting. Achilles will not rest until you lie as I do now." A savage struggle erupted over Patroclus's corpse and Achilles' armor he wore. The Myrmidons fought desperately to recover their fallen comrade, while Hector's Trojans sought to claim the legendary armor as a trophy. Ultimately, Menelaus and Ajax managed to carry Patroclus's broken body back to the Greek camp, but Hector retreated into Troy bearing Achilles' armor as his prize. When word reached Achilles that Patroclus had fallen, his grief transcended all bounds. He threw himself to the ground, pouring dust over his head and tearing at his golden hair. His anguished wails carried across the entire camp, freezing the blood of all who heard them. His mother, the sea nymph Thetis, rose from ocean depths in response to her son's agony. She found him beyond consolation, consumed now by a transformed wrath-not, the cold anger he had nursed against Agamemnon, but white-hot fury directed at Hector and all Troy. "I will return to battle," Achilles vowed through his tears. "I will neither eat nor drink until Patroclus is avenged and Hector lies dead by my hand." "My son," Thetis said, her voice breaking with prophetic knowledge, "if you kill Hector, your own death will follow swiftly. This is the fate the fates have spun for you." "Then let it come," Achilles replied, without hesitation. "What value has life when I failed to protect the one I loved most? I cannot live with this shame." Since Hector now possessed Achilles' armor, Thetis journeyed to Olympus itself, to the forge of Hephaestus, the divine craftsman. She begged him to create new armor for her son, and moved by her tears, the lame god labored through the night at his magical forge. By dawn, he had crafted the most magnificent armor ever worn by mortal man. A shield depicting the entire cosmos, a breastplate blazing like the sun, greaves of indestructible bronze, and a helmet crowned with a plume of pure gold. When Thetis delivered this divine panoply to her son, Achilles acted immediately. He summoned the entire Greek army to assembly. Before the gathered host, he formally renounced his quarrel with Agamemnon. "The anger that divided us has cost too dearly," he declared. "While we quarreled like children, good men perished. I return to battle now not for you, Agamemnon, but for Patroclus, who deserved far better than dying in my armor while I sulked in my tent." Agamemnon, equally eager to end their feud, facing their common enemy, accepted Achilles' return without demanding apology. He immediately ordered Briseis returned, along with all promised gifts, but Achilles dismissed these offerings with a wave. "Keep your treasures. They mean nothing to me now. All that matters is reaching Hector before sunset." As Achilles prepared for battle, strapping on his new divine armor, his immortal horses, Xanthus and Peleus, offspring of the west wind, spoke to him with human voices, a rare and ominous sign. "We will carry you swiftly today, mighty Achilles," said Xanthus, "but the hour of your death approaches. Patroclus fell not through our failure, but by divine will and mortal strength. I know I am doomed to die here, far from my homeland," Achilles replied grimly. "But I will not depart for Hades' realm before sending many Trojans ahead to announce my coming." When Achilles finally charged onto the battlefield in his gleaming new armor, the effect was terror itself. Trojans who had been confidently pursuing Greeks now turned and fled in panic. Many were cut down in flight. Others, desperate to escape, plunged into the river Scamander, where Achilles followed, slaughtering them in such numbers that the river god himself rose in protest, nearly drowning the hero in swirling waters. Only Hephaestus's interventions sending fire to dry the river's fury saved Achilles from divine wrath. Freed from the river's clutches, he continued his rampage across the plain, driving surviving Trojans back to their city like terrified cattle. At Troy's gates, only one man remained outside as the massive doors swung shut behind the retreating army. Hector, Troy's champion, waited alone to face the approaching storm. His father, King Priam, and mother Hecuba pleaded from the walls for him to come inside to fight another day. But Hector held his ground. "I cannot hide behind walls while others die for me," he said. "I led our forces in confidence. I cannot abandon them in fear." As Achilles drew nearer, however, even Hector's courage faltered. The man approaching seemed more than human Davin armor blazing in sunlight, face a mask of unstoppable fury. At the final moment, Hector's nerve broke, and he ran not from cowardice's shame, but from instinctive recognition that he faced something beyond mortal opposition. 3 times they circled Troy's walls, Achilles pursuing, Hector fleeing. The gods watched from above Apollo, who had protected Hector many times before, and Athena, who ensured Achilles would not fail. It was Athena who finally ended the chase by appearing to Hector disguised as his brother, suggesting they make their stand together. When Hector turned to find his brother absent, Achilles was upon him. The duel between their ages to greatest warriors was brief but terrible. Hector fought with desperate courage, defending everything he loved. But Achilles fought with transcendent fury, having nothing left to lose. The outcome was never truly in doubt. Achilles' spear found the gap at Hector's throat, one of few vulnerable spots in the armor that had once belonged to Achilles himself. As Hector lay dying, he made a final request. "I beg you, by your own life and by your parents." The death of Patroclus and Hector, the 12 days of sacred peace granted for Hector's funeral rites, passed like a fleeting dream amid war's endless nightmare. When the truce expired, battle erupted anew with ferocious intensity. Though Troy had been robbed of its mightiest champion, the city's god-forged walls still stood defiant. The Greeks, despite Achilles' return to their ranks, had bled too heavily to mount a direct assault on those legendary fortifications. Achilles, knowing death shadowed his every step, fought with an unsettling blend of savage fury and resigned fatalism. Each dawn found him donning his divine armor. Each day witnessed him cutting through Trojan warriors like wheat before a scythe. Each dusk saw him return to his tent, having cheated prophecy for one more day. Battle's momentum had swung decisively toward the Greeks, yet ultimate victory remained tantalizingly out of reach. Into this stalemate rode fresh champions to bolster Troy's flagging defense. From the eastern lands came Penthesilea, warrior queen of the Amazons. At the head of her fierce sisterhood women, as deadly with sword and spear as any Mantha, Amazon queen sought glory and absolution, haunted by the accidental killing of her sister during a hunt. For a time, Penthesilea and her warriors breathed new hope into Troy's desperate defenders. They launched daring raids against Greek positions, with the queen herself becoming a whirlwind of death on the battlefield. Achilles, who had withdrawn somewhat from combat's daily grind, found himself drawn back to the front lines by tales of this legendary warrior woman's prowess. Their inevitable confrontation proved as brief as it was epic. Penthesilea fought with breathtaking courage, her spear actually piercing Achilles' god-forged armor, a feat achieved by precious few mortals. Yet, in the end, Achilles' superhuman strength proved insurmountable. As his spear pierced her heart, their eyes locked, and some accounts claim Achilles fell tragically in love with the Amazon queen in the very instant he killed her. Enraged by such disrespect toward a worthy foe, Achilles struck down the speaker, Thersites, a common soldier notorious for his insolent tongue. This violent act fractured the Greek camp. With many feeling Achilles had overstepped by killing a fellow Greek over a fallen enemy. After the Amazons came another unexpected ally for Troy, Memnon, king of Ethiopia and son of Eos, goddess of the dawn. His arrival with substantial reinforcements once again shifted battle's tide. Memnon's martial prowess rivaled even Achilles, and he cut down numerous Greek champions, including Antilochus, son of old Nestor. The young warrior sacrificed himself to save his elderly father from Memnon's deadly spear. Grief-stricken over Antilochus' death, the youth had been dear to him since losing. Patroclus Achilles sought out Memnon for a duel that even the Olympian gods watched with rapt attention. On high Olympus, Zeus himself weighed the two heroes' fates on golden scales, and Memnon's scale sank, foretelling his doom. The duel between Achilles and Memnon raged long and evenly matched. Both were sons of immortal mothers. Both wore armor forged by gods. Both fought with superhuman skill. Spears flew and were dodged. Swords clashed until shields buckled. Finally, Achilles drove his blade beneath Memnon's breastplate. As the Ethiopian king fell, his mother Eos wept tears that became the morning dew. She continues mourning him with each dawn to this day. With each victory, Achilles drew closer to his prophesied doom. Even as the Trojans retreated toward their gates following Memnon's defeat, Paris, who had ignited the war but rarely distinguished himself in combat, stood with Apollo at the Scion gate. As Achilles pursued the fleeing Trojans, Paris nocked an arrow to his bow. Apollo guided the shot toward the one vulnerable spot on Achilles' body, his heel, which had remained untouched when his mother dipped him in the river Styx to grant immortality in infancy. The arrow struck true, piercing the tendon that would forever after bear Achilles' name. The great hero stumbled, then fell, scarcely believing his end had come, not at a worthy opponent's hands in honorable combat, but from a distance, shot by the very man whose actions had launched this decade of bloodshed. As Achilles lay dying, Paris and the Trojans surged forward to claim his body. But Ajax and Odysseus fought their way to their fallen comrade, driving back the enemy and recovering the corpse of Greece's greatest warrior. Achilles' death plunged the Greek camp into mourning more profound even than when Patroclus had fallen. For 17 days, funeral games held in his honor paused the fighting as heroes competed to honor his memory. His divine armor became the subject of bitter dispute between Ajax and Odysseus, both of whom had risked their lives recovering his body. When the Greek leaders awarded the armor to Odysseus in recognition of his cunning and strategic brilliance, Ajax, the physically strongest Greek after Achilles, was driven mad by this perceived dishonor. In his madness, he slaughtered a flock of sheep, believing them to be his fellow Greeks who had wronged him. When sanity returned and he realized what he had done, unbearable shame drove him to fall upon his own sword. Thus, within a tragically short span, the Greeks had lost their 3 greatest warriors, Patroclus, Achilles, and Ajax. Victory seemed more distant than ever, especially when Apollo's priest Calchas revealed that Troy would never fall while it possessed the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena that protected the city. Odysseus and Diomedes undertook a perilous night mission, infiltrating Troy through underground passages, stealing the Palladium, and escaping back to the Greek camp. Still, the god-built walls stood unbreached. 10 years of siege, countless heroes dead on both sides, and the end seemed no closer than when the 1,000 ships had first landed on Trojan shores. It was then that Odysseus, whose strategic mind had been honed razor-sharp by a decade of inconclusive warfare, conceived a plan so audacious it would either bring about Troy's downfall or result in the final destruction of the Greek forces. "We cannot defeat Troy through strength of arms," he told the assembled Greek leaders in Agamemnon's tent. "Their walls are impregnable, built by the gods themselves. But what if we could convince the Trojans to bring us inside those walls of their own accord?" The plan Odysseus outlined that night, the stratagem of the wooden horse, would become the most famous military deception in history, a testament to the ancient truth that when brute strength fails, cunning may yet prevail. Meanwhile, within Troy's walls, the mood was cautiously optimistic. Achilles' death had raised hopes that the siege might soon be lifted. Paris, elevated in status by his fortunate shot, strutted through the palace as though the war were already won. But his triumph proved short-lived. In a skirmish outside the walls, Paris himself was struck by a poisoned arrow shot by Philoctetes, who had finally been brought from Lemnos to the Greek camp after a prophecy revealed that Troy could not fall without Heracles' bow, which Philoctetes possessed. The wound festered, and Paris, in desperation, sought out his first wife, the mountain nymph Oenone, whom he had abandoned for Helen years before. Only she possessed the power to heal such wounds. But bitter over his betrayal, she refused to help. By the time she relented and rushed to Troy, Paris was already dead. In her grief, Oenone threw herself upon his funeral pyre. Helen, who had been Paris's prize and the cause of so much suffering, was passed to his brother Deiphobus, though some in Troy suggested returning her to the Greeks to end the conflict. But after 10 years of war and incalculable losses on both sides, neither the Greeks nor the Trojans were willing to end matters so simply. Too much blood had been spilled, too many heroes had fallen, too many oaths of vengeance had been sworn. The stage was set for the final act of this epic tragedy, a desperate gamble by the Greeks, a fatal mistake by the Trojans, and the fiery end of a city that had stood for centuries. The Trojan horse and fall of Troy. The wooden horse stood on the plains before Troy, massive and imposing in the golden light of sunset. Its polished flanks gleamed, and its carved head seemed to gaze toward the city with hollow, enigmatic eyes. The Trojan scouts who first spotted it approached cautiously, puzzled by this strange monument left behind on the otherwise abandoned beach. The Greek camps that had dotted the shoreline for a decade had vanished. Tents struck, cooking fires extinguished, waste pits filled in. More shocking still, the vast fleet that had brought the invaders to Trojan shores had disappeared. Only blackened patches on the sand remained where the 1,000 ships had been dragged up for so many years. Word spread rapidly through Troy. Citizens rushed to the walls, hardly daring to believe their long nightmare might be over. The Greeks had finally abandoned their futile siege. After 10 grinding years, the war might truly be at an end. But what was this massive wooden structure they had left behind? a scouting party ventured out from the city gates, the first time in years that Trojans had been able to walk the plain without fear of Greek arrows or spears. They found the beach deserted except for a single Greek soldier bound to a post. The man was bruised and bloodied, apparently left behind in the Greeks' hasty departure. This man was Sinon, chosen by Odysseus for his quick wit and convincing manner. When the Trojans cut him free, he fell to his knees in apparent gratitude. "Thank the gods you found me," he gasped. "They would have sacrificed me for favorable winds had I not escaped my bonds." The Trojans, suspicious but curious, questioned him about the wooden horse. Sinon's tale was a masterpiece of deception, crafted to play upon Trojan pride and religious fears. "The horse is an offering to Athena," he explained, "built at the prophet Calchas' instruction. The Greeks made it so large that you could not bring it through your gates, ensuring it would remain outside your walls. For there is a prophecy, if the Trojans take possession of this offering to Athena, they will one day invade Greece and destroy our cities, as you almost destroyed Troy. But if you damage the horse, Athena's wrath will fall upon Troy." The Trojans debated what to do with this strange gift as they escorted Sinon back to the city. Some, like Thymites, urged bringing the horse inside as a trophy of their victory. Others, more suspicious, suggested burning it, or at least examining it more carefully. Glaucon, a priest of Apollo, voiced the strongest objections. Rushing down from the citadel, he cried, "Have you lost your minds? Do you really believe the Greeks have given up and sailed away? This is surely a trick. Either there are armed men inside this thing, or it's a siege engine to overtop our walls, or some other deception. Whatever it is, do not trust it." To emphasize his point, Laocoon hurled his spear at the horse's flank. The hollow thud that echoed back should have confirmed his suspicions. But at that very moment, the gods intervened to seal Troy's fate. As Laocoon returned to the shore to sacrifice a bull to Poseidon, two enormous serpents emerged from the sea. With horrifying speed, they wrapped themselves around the priest and his two young sons, who had joined him for the ritual. Before the eyes of the terrified Trojans, the serpents crushed all three to death, their screams cutting off as their ribs cracked in the powerful coils. Having completed their grim work, the serpents slithered away to the temple of Apollo on the citadel. The stunned Trojans interpreted this as divine punishment for Leucon's assault on the horse. They murmured, "The priest was struck down for his impiety. The horse must truly be sacred to Athena." Then came a second sign. Helen's sister-in-law, Cassandra, blessed with prophetic sight by Apollo, but cursed never to be believed, ran through the streets, screaming that the horse would bring destruction if brought within the walls. "Fire," she cried. "I see fire and blood. Do not bring death into our city." But as always, her true prophecies were dismissed as madness. With these apparent divine judgments influencing their decision, the Trojans made their fateful choice. The massive horse would be brought into the city as a trophy, an offering to Athena. But the city gates were too small to admit the structure. In their eagerness, the Trojans did what 10 years of Greek siege had failed to accomplish. They breached their own walls, tearing down a section to create an opening large enough for the horse. Young men attached ropes to the wooden colossus and began the laborious process of dragging it from the beach into the city. Wheels had been attached to its base to facilitate this movement, yet still it was slow, arduous work. Crowds lined the route, singing hymns to Athena and celebrating what they believed was their deliverance from war. As the horse passed through the broken wall into Troy proper, maidens scattered flowers before it, and priests offered prayers to Athena, seeking her blessing now that her gift had been properly honored. With tremendous effort, the Trojans pulled the horse into the central plaza before the main temple, where it would stand as a monument to their survival and victory. That night, Troy erupted in the first true celebration it had known in a decade. Wine flowed freely, music filled the streets, even the guards drank their fill. The exhausted population, released at last from the constant threat of Greek attack, abandoned themselves to revelry. As the night deepened, the sounds of celebration gradually faded, replaced by the heavy breathing of drunk, exhausted sleepers. Inside the wooden horse, the chosen Greek warriors had endured a day of cramped discomfort, barely daring to breathe as the Trojans examined their hiding place. Besides Odysseus, the hollow belly concealed Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, Ajax the Lesser, and other notable fighters, the best of those who had survived the decade-long conflict. When the city finally fell silent, Sinon crept to the horse and gave the signal. From inside, Odysseus cautiously opened the hidden trap-door in the horse's belly, and one by one, the warriors descended on ropes to the street below. They moved with practiced silence, years of warfare having taught them the art of stealth. Their first targets were the guards at the main gates, who were quickly dispatched. As those gates swung open, Sinon lit a massive signal fire on the walls, a beacon, visible far out to sea, where the Greek fleet had been hiding behind the nearby island of Tenedos. Throughout the sleeping city, the Greeks who had hidden in the horse began their deadly work. Some, led by Neoptolemus, moved toward the royal palace. Others targeted the barracks where what remained of Troy's fighting force lay in drunken slumber. Odysseus and Menelaus made for the house of Deiphobus, where they expected to find Helen. By the time the first Trojan citizens awoke to the sounds of combat, Greek soldiers were already pouring through the open gates and spreading throughout the city. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The Trojans, caught completely by surprise and still half drunk from their celebration, had no chance to organize an effective defense. The Greeks, hardened by 10 years of war and remembering their many fallen comrades, showed little mercy. Houses were set ablaze, initially to provide light for their attack, but soon, as a deliberate tactic to drive out hiding Trojans and create chaos, the flames spread quickly from building to building, aided by a strong wind that seemed to be sent by the gods themselves, perhaps Hera and Athena, still nursing their ancient grudge against Troy. And so the great city of Troy, which had stood for generations, fell in a single night of fire and blood. The war that began with a golden apple and the abduction of a beautiful queen ended with flames consuming the towers of Ilium and the screams of its people fading into the smoke-filled sky. The story of the Trojan War has echoed through the centuries, reminding us of the terrible cost of pride, vengeance, and unchecked ambition. Heroes rose and fell, kingdoms were destroyed, and the gods watched from Olympus, their ancient quarrels playing out through mortal lives. As you drift into sleep tonight, may these ancient tales carry you gently into your dreams. Rest well, knowing that though empires may fall and heroes may fade, their stories endure, passed down through countless generations, whispered in the darkness, remembered always. Sleep peacefully, dear listener, until we meet again in another tale from the ancient world.